Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and beyond. Our guest today is a scientist and science communicator. She uses a variety of ways to bring science to the general public. This includes working around some of the things that can stand in the way.
There's also this other component where people are taught that science is hard. And I really try to work against this mentality that science is hard. Because if people think science is hard, then they don't think they can be a part of it. They don't think they can understand it. And they never feel empowered to engage in it themselves.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartow.
I feel like we should have noisemakers. Happy 2022, everyone.
You know what's interesting is if some of you are listeners of The Daily, they've had an ad talking about I can't exactly remember what the ad is, but it talks about how podcasts were new in 2004. I want to say wow, we've been there.
It's an ad for electric cars, and they're saying,
that's what it is.
Yeah, it's remember when podcasts were weird and now they're normal? And yeah, they talked about when the term was first coined, it was 2004 or something like that. Because but we started in 2006,
right?
And that was, I still think, pre-Apple podcasts. And then once Apple started doing it in iTunes, then it kind of really took off too.
We're not quite at the arthritic stage of our podcast, but we're looking towards saving for no, I don't know. We've been around.
I kind of think of this podcast as similar to the topic our guest is talking about today, which is science communication.
Well, yeah, we've talked about that for decades now.
Yeah. Our guest today is Dr. Carly Ann York. She's a biology professor, animal physiologist, and science communicator. And that's our first question for her. What does that mean to be a science communicator?
That means that I spend a lot of time talking to people who don't have any background in science about scientific research.
Okay. So can you give us some examples of what that looks like, or what that sounds like, I guess?
Sure. It's actually, it's a very, very broad category of things, science communication. It can be anything from being on social media, which I do a lot of, to writing books for popular audiences, or being on YouTube, or working with the Science Channel. These are all things that I have done as part of my science communication career. So it's really anything that takes science and brings it to the general public. I mean, I have written messages on sidewalks with sidewalk chalk and called that science communication.
Nice.
So it can be really, truly anything that brings a science message to people.
It sounds like it would take a lot of self-motivation at times. No boss is telling you to go take that sidewalk chalk and write some messages.
It's true. It's definitely not a boss-motivated behavior of mine.
Sure.
It's something that I feel is incredibly important to do as a scientist, and it's within it's like an ethical necessity that scientists learn how to talk to non-scientists. And I feel like the past 2 years have been a pretty good example with COVID of what happens when the general public doesn't trust science and scientists have not practiced and do not have the language for communicating people without a science degree. We clearly have a problem in our society where there's this miscommunication between these two groups. And I think it's just as much our fault on the science end as it is within the general public and our education system, really. We are never taught throughout our science education how to translate what we know, what we have spent years and years and years learning. How do we translate that into something that's understandable for everybody? So it's skill building. It's figuring out how to get this message across.
I thought we were making some head ground, years back. I thought, science was really taking more of a front seat in popular culture.
Scientific literacy, we called it.
Yeah, I thought we were getting somewhere. And now I'm afraid of
Surprise!
What happened. The Big Bang Theory TV show couldn't solve all our problems.
Yeah, apparently not.
Yeah,
apparently not. There's people that love that. There's people who will watch David Attenborough all day long. I think these are still not the majority of folks.
Do you think there's a crossover of, let's say, people who don't trust science but still watch David Attenborough? Like, they're of two minds at sometimes. Like, is it science or is it something else that's the puppeteer here?
Oh, I mean, this is...
Do they secretly go down and at night and watch David Attenborough and like make sure the family doesn't know?
What were you doing down there? It wasn't a science video.
So much of it is politically driven too, which I honestly... It's an important thing to understand as a science communicator, that when you have misinformation that's rampant and being really highly promoted by the media, particularly certain political stances, it's really important to understand it and know it. I personally try not to harp too much on that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it. Like, we don't want to go into politics because it's so quickly going into like people's camps, but I just wonder, because I know that we have, as a podcast, as science teachers, we have talked about this kind of thing, I really think, my entire career, about getting the public to better understand science, better science communicators. We had guests on the show in the past that were working with media production to consult with scientists to make sure that was represented well. And the only thing I can land on, I guess, is the recent thing I'm kicking around, is people just are too quick to go into their camps. And this is a weird comparison, but I follow Formula One racing, and Brian's probably rolling his eyes that I'm trying to get Formula One into a science teacher podcast.
I'm just watching the birds in the backyard, that's all.
But in Formula One, there's this big heated battle right now between the two top people. And if you go, for example, online, I found myself, it was almost impossible to be... to look at the situations critically, because everything was under you're in this side or that side. And I guess where I'm going with science is that, how do we get that communication out there that the side we're on is that critical examination of evidence and that revisit of evidence. That's the side. So we're never really swayed by these, there's no camp, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where to go with all of that. And you can say hard pass. I'm totally fine with that. But I feel like this is so swirling with science communication right now that.
It absolutely is. And I'm not going to say hard pass, but just I genuinely don't know the answer to this question. Because the reality is that even the word fact has gotten so skewed over the past few years, right? That having this whole system of information that's acquired through the scientific method and years of research, the whole process is misunderstood by half of our country.
Yeah.
And
sometimes taught incorrectly as well, as we know.
Science education in our country it's weak. There's no question about that. There's also this other component where people are taught that science is hard. And I really try to work against this mentality that science is hard.
How come?
Because if people think science is hard, then they don't think they can be a part of it. They don't think they can understand it, and they never feel empowered to engage in it themselves.
So it's like a special club. I'm not good enough
academic
for
elite.
Elitist.
Yeah.
Got it.
Right. And how people feel about the elite.
Mm-hmm.
So I encounter this often in my teaching, I teach a non-majors biology class, and I have for the past 5 years, twice a year. So I have a lot of semesters of this under my belt now. And it's amazing. The students that I get in the first day, they don't want to be there. I'd say half of them are dreading this or terrified of this and had some awful experience either in middle school or high school with science. And they think science is hard and they think they can't do it.
And there's only so much you can talk about sex to keep their attention, right?
For
biological sex.
I talk about sex so much to try to keep their attention. It's one of my favorite science communication tools is talking about sex. It's really funny that you said that.
I so wish I could use that for the teaser of the podcast.
I've actually recently gotten on TikTok. I'm trying to learn new skills. And I've decided the best accounts seem to have themes. So I've decided that my theme is going to be like animal sex facts.
Yeah.
And the reality is that it's fascinating, right? People want to know about sex, and animals are weird, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff. So it's a hook. It's a hook into the science. Just like some people will say talking about dinosaurs is a hook into the science. If you can find something that catches just about everybody's attention and sneak some information in there, great. And at the same time, you're also giving them a face to now trust, to be like, oh, you are a scientist. I see you. You're giving me information, and I can accept this kind of science being tossed at me versus just these lines of text telling you how you should live and what's good for you and what's not good for you.
I think you just described a classroom teacher. You're trying to sneak the science in there. You're trying to build trust. You're trying to get them interested, and an audience that might not be interested, and kind of that's a challenge for a classroom teacher all the time, because not every kid comes to that class liking science or wanting to be there and all of those kinds of things. And we're always trying to unlock that. But man, I don't know if I'm ready to do TikTok. I think Brian and I were literally looking at one today, and
we were looking at one about our county recycling styrofoam, which is actually fascinating in and of itself. But I'm like, the county recycling department has its own TikTok, and we don't.
And Brian's like, I just don't know if I'll ever understand TikTok. And I was like, aw.
It's a different world, totally. It's really fun, though. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm still trying to figure out the very basic things. And, of course, the one trick that I figured out that I can reliably use this one. It has now disappeared on me, and I can't find the stupid button. I don't know where it went, but that was all I knew how to do. So I just before this was trying to figure out what I could do I'm just trying to show a picture and point at it.
Yeah,
sure. I'm just trying to figure out how to do that. So yeah, it's the Wild West out there. But there is some actual research on this idea of like having scientists in social media spaces and the benefits of it. There's this movement that I wasn't a part of this research at all. I've just read it and admired it, but it's basically called Scientists Who Selfie.
Oh.
And the research was looking at the public experiences of these social media accounts when scientists actually shared their face and their life with the general public versus scientists who only talk about their work. And what the research says is that this is actually a really great way to get the general public to trust you and to engage in the science, which these are the goals of the field of science communication. And it can also be incredibly helpful for inclusivity within the STEM fields, where if people can see who you are, what you look like, they realize that science isn't all just old white men, that there's wide diversity of people who are engaging in this discipline. So there's a lot of benefits to actually being a scientist that selfies in terms of promoting the field of science communication, which was great to read because I felt a little silly when I started. I wasn't sure if what I was doing was actually a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been following more and more scientists on Twitter and what we affectionately call science Twitter. And I really, loved adding them into my feed, especially when, politics ramped up so much. Not only because I trust scientists more in a political sense. I have a T-shirt that I always remind myself when it's an election time, vote science. That's a lot of how I like to think. But it just felt it was more upbeat. It was a more positive influence on my Twitter feed than just election and political. I guess defeat is what I would describe that as.
Yeah, science Twitter is a great place. It's the only place on Twitter that I've really known. I'm still relatively new. I've only been on for, I guess, close to 2 years now. Well, it was a weird 2 years, but close to 2 years now I've been on Twitter.
I also get the sense that there are a lot less white men on science Twitter than just like the whole of what I see out there.
Yeah, it's a wide diversity. It's great.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It's fascinating to see, and we've known this for a while as educators that we need to have people that students can identify with. Again, like I said, as a scientist, culturally, and how they look and how they see themselves, they need to see that. And I see that in science Twitter a lot. Where if I was back in the classroom right now, that would be one thing that I'd be wanting to showcase is these are real scientists. And going against the Big Bang Theory kind of stereotype, because I think that may have been more problematic than helpful to some extent. These are real people. And when they share their lives with you, it's also rewarding, and you're willing to go down a better path to say, okay, I trust you on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I kind of hate the Big Bang Theory. I know that's an unpopular opinion.
We've had we've had Bill Prady on the show, and we've talked to him about this, and we've been Bill Prady, the producer of the show, and kind of talked up and down about it and kind of things. And I mean, his point was, this still got people talking about science and introduced it to people's lives, and so it was going there. But there was certainly stereotypes I feel perpetuated with the show, and I struggle with that today because I know there's also people
identifying with some of that too.
And there's people that that they have the T-shirts, and so I don't want to dunk on that either. Like the appreciation of it or the pride there was with some of that, but then there is the other
collective
side of
identity. Yeah, sure.
Do you think that the public understands how much talking is involved with science, discourse, those kinds of things that is involved? Like, it's not all just beakers and experiments, that there is a negotiating of what we're observing, and that kind of that it's a community activity. Do you think the public appreciates that?
Probably not. I think in general, the public has no idea what we do on a daily basis and how science is created. I don't think they understand the peer review process for the most part. They don't understand the amount of time it takes to produce science. And on the other hand, when talking about the collaborative nature of this, and I also don't know that science training always does the best job emphasizing these skills, these other skills like writing and talking. You do it as a researcher and as a grad student and as a postdoc, but you don't get a ton of training in it. And a lot of it is up to your personal experiences in graduate school. And I think that sometimes this ends up playing a role back again with the science communication, where people aren't fantastic at this.
Sure.
And that communal, collaborative nature, it feeds into the science communication as well.
Is it also they just don't want to do it? Like, they don't see its value? Like, let someone else do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. It's really interesting because I am too new to science communication. This came with my move to get on Twitter. And I say that each time I tell the story, I do this and then I regret doing it. I'm actually not new to science communication. I've been a science communicator for at least 5 years now, where I've been teaching these non-majors biology courses where the whole goal is to talk to people with no science interests or education about science. I've also done some work with TED Ed where I was helping to write some animated lessons. And that was before my move onto Twitter. So I already kind of had this mindset of talking to the general public about science, but getting on Twitter was my real catalyst into this world. So that part of it, doing podcasts and books and all these other things, that's relatively new to me. And it's been really, really interesting to see everything from a different lens now, and who's participating in science communication and who's not participating in science communication. I recently went to a research conference. I haven't been to many in the past few years, and I gave a workshop on science communication where I was sitting in a room full of some of the top researchers in my field of animal physiology and biomechanics. And I was telling them to get on Twitter and take selfies of themselves. And I did my talk. I did this, and this researcher who I just adore. I admire her so much. Her name's Sheila Paddock, and she's a researcher at Duke, again, one of the very top names in my field. She came up to me afterwards and she said, "Carly, I have some thoughts. Can we talk some more?" And I was like, oh no. I just told these people to get on Twitter and take selfies, and I'm an idiot. But she loved it.
Oh, good. Oh, I thought this was going to end in a never meet your hero story. Oh, thank God.
No, she was absolutely wonderful. But she did scare me. So I left that conference feeling good and validated that I feel like I can help sort of like chip away at this. And the cool part is that like absolutely anyone can do this at different stages of their career. And with this workshop, I was giving it with another researcher, huge name in my field, and his focus was more on like how to get your research in the New York Times. And it was, you hire the best photographers, you use equipment that's thousands of dollars, and then you have your university's PR office deal with it from there. And I was sitting there listening to this part of the workshop and thinking, like, I don't have access to any of those things. I'm at a little liberal arts.
Yeah, that's like the top tier kind of like a researcher, right?
Right. Yeah. I don't have a PR office. I definitely don't have the funding to spend on photography and photography equipment just to promote my research. But you don't have to have those things to participate in science communication. You can just have a Twitter account or an Instagram account, whatever it is that you feel like the way you are best at communicating. You can do that. You can get on YouTube. You can start a podcast. You don't need to have thousands of dollars to spend on this, though it sure is helpful.
Does it help to have animals?
My farm, you mean?
Yeah.
Like animals as a subject matter, that seems to be a good...
Well, being able to post pictures with an animal, like, I'm thinking of a headline, how to show your ass on Twitter kind of a thing. No, it's a donkey.
Are geologists jealous of people who can use animals in their science communication?
Yeah.
Sure. There absolutely is that component to it where, animals are fun. And my doctoral research was on squid. They're super weird. So
another squid person.
That's...
Brian,
you're not our first squid researcher.
Who was the other squid researcher just recently?
Was that
Sarah McAnulty?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, she is a friend.
Yeah. Oh, good.
We're a part of the Squid Squad.
The squid. Oh, whoa. Team Squid apparently.
Team Tentacle.
We have a text message group that is a few of us squid researchers. We hatch big plans that we hope to follow through with sometimes.
Well, she was bobtail squid, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a specialty species?
My species was the brief squid, which is off the eastern shore.
Known for its curtness.
I was studying how they avoid predators, actually.
Okay.
So
is it?
It was fun.
Is it all like they change their shape and appearance?
They do. So they change their colors. They can change their posturing as well. inking too, but they also have some unique sensory modalities, and that's what I was pretty keyed in on. They have these little hair cells that are all over their bodies that actually help them to feel the water moving and when a predator is approaching them. So I was looking at how they use that in both like light and dark, and depending on how fast the predator was coming at them. So the nuance.
It's like Spidey senses, but for squid.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, okay. Let's talk about that a little bit. What else should we know about your research and what you study?
Well, the squid research is actually behind me, sadly. I am at Lenoir-Rhyne University, which is a liberal arts school in Western North Carolina. And unfortunately, there are no squid in Western North Carolina. I was about to say,
that's a little harder to get to the ocean there.
Yeah, so when I took this position, I got here and one of the other faculty members was like, hey, we have this colony of frogs. Do you want to do frog stuff? And I was like, what the heck? Sure. I don't have anything else to do. So I took this colony of Africanclawed frogs. And these frogs are interesting and unique. They're from Africa, and they do literally have claws. They have little black toenails on their hind feet.
Really? Frogs don't have nails usually, right?
Not for the most part. No, they just have these 2 or 3 extra little claws on their back feet. They're fully aquatic, so they're not super graceful on land. And they have a really interesting history, actually. They were the first pregnancy tests that were widely available. So they were carried in labs and hospitals all throughout the 60s. And if you wanted to know if you were pregnant, you went to your doctor.
Please don't say pee in a frog.
You don't pee in the frog, but you pee in a cup. And then a doctor or a lab tech will then inject the frog with that urine.
Wait, what? What?
Yeah. So what they were picking up is human gonadotrophic hormone, which is the hormone that says you're pregnant. Like, that's why if you pee on a stick,
sure,
it'll ding positive or negative. It's picking up that particular hormone. And the frogs were really sensitive to it. So if you were pregnant and you had this hormone, the frogs would then just like spew a bunch of eggs everywhere, and usually within 24 hours. So it was a pretty quick turnaround. So this was the common pregnancy test all through the 60s.
Imagine picking those up at Walgreens.
Method. Yeah. So these were carried in hospitals and labs all over the world. And of course, with any animal that is commonly kept, there were escapees. And
sure.
They are now actually an invasive species all around the world. And the same things that make them really easy to keep in labs make them really good invasive species too. So they have long lives. They can live for like 15 to 20 years. They eat everything. They're super hardy. Like, temperature changes don't bother them much. Dirty water doesn't bother them much. So they're really thriving all around the world.
Oh boy.
And that's a big question mark in terms of how they're affecting the ecology in places where they have decided to build colonies.
What are they called again?
Africanclawed frogs.
And is there a specific, do you know where in Africa they are from?
They were a South African species.
So I'm still back on the pregnancy test there. Were they reusable or?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's what made them so great.
Wasn't there a thing about rabbits in pregnancy, or did I imagine that?
Yes. Rabbits were used before the frogs, but they were tougher to use and much less frequently used. It required a longer time between injection, and then you ultimately had to kill the animal and dissect it to know if you were pregnant or not. So not really.
That's where the whole rabbit died kind of expression came.
Yeah.
Well, but both of those scenarios draw up ethical considerations of animal treatment, and I'm sensing that you probably use these discussions in your your biology class for non-majors or non-science students, that, and you could touch upon a lot of things within just this one story.
Absolutely. And that's not even the end of it. So amphibians are one of the most vulnerable groups of animals that we have in terms of extinction. And there is a fungus that's been causing mass declines of population. It's called chytrid fungus. And many scientists think that this actually came from the African-clawed frogs that were released everywhere. The African-clawed frogs have a mucus that's all over their body that has an antimicrobial component to it. And they think that this fungus was probably prevalent in their native habitat, and they developed this mucus covering in order to protect themselves, but they carried it with them. And then when they were released in places they shouldn't be, they then released this fungus. So this is one of the leading causes of extinction of amphibians now, is this chytrid fungus. So this was a hot mess, this whole African-clawed frog story. There's a lot.
How big are these frogs?
Do you use a lot of your own research in teaching your courses?
I try to. And just to answer your question, they're about the size of your hand. The females are a little bigger than the males, so they're pretty big frogs. I do my best to use my research in varying degrees in my different classes. I teach this non-majors class. I also teach animal physiology, which is an upper level biology course. So they get a lot more of it in animal physiology than they do in the non-majors, except for the stories that can be told throughout all of this, which there certainly are stories.
I'm assuming that you encourage your students, both the science track students and the non-science students, that science communication is important. How do you encourage that with them, or how do you have them practice that?
I just started last year teaching a science communication course. So it's just a 2-credit-hour course that I'm working on. Actually, I'm in the process of having a lot of wheels turned, where I'm hoping, I am filling out paperwork to actually create a science communication minor at my university. I feel like this is the direction that our program really needs to move. We're a liberal arts university, and interdisciplinary work is supposed to be like what we do, and science communication is such fantastic interdisciplinary work.
So you wouldn't need a science major to get the minor, right? Other fields could get this minor, maybe?
Yeah, we're working on this. We're working closely with our communications department to figure out the logistics, to be like, what if you're a communications person with a special interest in science? We'll work that out. Anyone within this can get it. We have this list of classes that are required, so it would still require a pretty substantial science load just to make sure you understood the basics of the things that you were talking about. So between this class and working towards this minor, I have definitely emphasized science communication within our majors. I'd like to emphasize it even more within our faculty too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Sure. I see so many parallels here, as I said, like with the classroom teacher. And one thing that comes to mind is, as you teach, you kind of think about, okay, what will grab, not attention, but kind of connect with students. So with communication, it'd be similar. And for me personally, it's usually sort of the, what is my place in the universe kind of thing. Like, I get to be part of this, just a small part of this huge thing. And I like to, the part of the human experience to understand all of that and know where you fit. And one time in my teaching, I think it dawned on me that was something that I took personally as a wow, and isn't science great? Whereas other people felt the opposite. They found it unsettling. And I guess in your science communication work, do you examine these kinds of things, almost like lists of things that people connect with science, like, the wonder, the things that will attract them, but also maybe repel them?
Probably naturally, yes. Not intentionally per se. Do I go through that list?
Yeah.
Like for my non-majors class, I taught that my first year by the book, and then I threw that book away because I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand why they would care about this, the way it was being presented, and so I did a massive course redesign where I now teach it in 5 modules. We do a conservation of species, love and sex, superbugs, GMOs, and climate change. And within those 5 modules, I can still cover all of the same concepts that I was teaching before, just instead they were in chapter 1, the cell, chapter 2, DNA. Right. Only now I can actually tie that into something that even if they don't care about, they've like heard about. And we can put the framework in to be like, hey, it does actually like matter whether or not you're super interested. This is stuff you should know. And here's why you should know it. Where before I couldn't quite justify why they should know these things.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Well, that's, I think, where some of that approach is changing in our K-12 science system. And I see some places adopting what's called timelines. The Illinois science teachers have made some of these where you have like the evolution of dogs as one of these timelines, for instance. And they wrap in a lot of different concepts instead of just, like you said, cells, the scientific method. And we're going to move on now to ecology as if they're their own islands of knowledge within the textbook.
Mm-hmm.
What criteria did you use to select those? Was it 5 modules?
Yeah, just my brain.
I know, but like, how did you kind of group those or select those? What made those 5 rise up, I guess?
Yeah, I was trying to really think of how to get the same information in, but with a bigger picture thing. So conservation of species, we talk about biodiversity, we talk about ecosystems, and we talk about taxonomy, different classifications of animals. In love and sex, that is a lot of sexual selection and physiology. Superbugs is my Trojan horse for evolution.
Oh.
Yeah, that's
I want to unpack that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's see how she avoided that trigger word there,
Yeah. So I'm on the Bible Belt, and figuring out how to talk about these topics without my students shutting down the very first class has been something that I've worked hard at. And if you talk about natural selection and you show them a video of antibiotic resistance happening in real time, and you can instantly stop that conversation of, oh, well, we can't see it happening, so we don't know if that's real. Well, we can see it happening. It's right here. It's happened over the course of 24 hours. And it makes them grapple with the information in a different way. So then the GMO module that I have, that's DNA and inheritance. And then climate change is everything from water, temperature, basic geological stuff. You can pack so many things into all of these. So I've had no trouble still covering all the basic things that one would cover chapter to chapter, just in this different framework.
Mm-hmm. And they all seem to have an easy human connection, first of all. And then the other thing is, like, when the teacher believes in the structure of it, it's gonna be delivered better.
Yeah, I personally couldn't figure out why my students would care when I was teaching it by the book. And I used to give multiple choice exams. I've totally ditched those in that class. We now do what I call them innovation projects. And each module has a very different kind of project that they can do, and they get to opt out of some of them if they want to. But like Superbugs, I actually have them create a board game that explains natural selection and antibiotic resistance. Climate change, they're doing food journals and calculating out their ecological footprints. Love and sex, they actually have to write a children's book about sexual selection in the animal kingdom.
I love that idea.
They're very fun to grade.
I just hear a mass of science teachers writing this down. And keep going. Yes. Let's see, the conservation species, that one, I send them to Joel Sartor's website, which, if you don't know of him, he's a fantastic wildlife photographer. And he has what's called the photo arc. And he's the person that they call in when this is the last of a species. Or the species is in super decline. And he takes these gorgeous portraits of these species. So I have them go to this website, pick an animal that they really identify with, and from there I send them over to the IUCN Red List
website, and they have to figure out all this information about them and ultimately figure out how what we do on this campus can affect the extinction rate of that animal, because what we do right here in North Carolina actually plays a major role in what's happening in South America and Asia.
I was going to say that sounded really sad, and it was connecting to a thought I had previous, can the public handle sad science results? Do all of our, because sometimes I can't remember you were talking about before, but there was the frogs the fungus. That's sad news, and we don't want to hear. Scientists are telling us bad news, but in with the photographs that you're talking about, you could tell that information to the public two different ways, or to your students two different ways. You could say, look at the damage it's doing, or I like what your approach is. The flip here could be, well, what can we do to help this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I try to be very action oriented with my teaching, because I'm someone who gets really frustrated when I'm told there's a problem and I'm not told what I can do about it.
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time thinking about, what can you do? This is my first. I taught environmental science this semester for the first time, and I added ending each lecture with okay, what do you do? What can we do?
Do you have students that want to take this beyond the assessment, like published children's authors, or campus-wide initiatives to decrease ecological footprints, those kinds of things?
I do. I have a little army that I created. Actually, yeah, I run a student organization as well. It's called Seeds, and it's a part of the Ecological Society of America. We're a chapter of the national branch, and the whole goal is to promote environmentalism and inclusivity in science on campuses. And I think different chapters have different ranges of what they do, and I've taken this well beyond what the national umbrella has told me to do with it, and it's become a campus-wide club for anyone who's interested in sustainability and environmentalism. And I have around 150 students on my roster, and I think that makes us the largest student organization on campus. We're a small school. So it's really encouraging to see this many students say, I want to know how to do better. Show me how to do better. So before COVID hit, we were really rocking and rolling. One of the major things that I like to hit on is people's diets, which I know, again, is not a fun thing that people like to talk about. But my ultimate goal, I'm going to say, don't tell, is to get enough people power for us to make some major changes in our cafeteria here, because it's the number one thing that we could do to actually make an impact and to teach some students some lifelong skills to have smaller footprints. What I'm talking about specifically is eating way less meat and dairy. It's animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change.
Sure.
So
you should connect with our local university. We're in Appleton and Wisconsin, and Lawrence University has made some great strides in their food options, with a lot of locally sourced food and again, less meat options as well. They've done some. We love to go there ourselves when it was open to the community.
Yeah.
COVID has kind of closed those doors since, but as soon as it's open, we're there again.
Yeah, I would love to. And I'm not alone on my campus wanting these things. I have a fantastic group of colleagues, and we're all yeah, let's do it. But we're also very busy. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Well, it's also hard to keep. I'm listening to you, and you sound very enthusiastic and just downright motivated about these things. We talked a little bit earlier about, why do you do what why what's keeping you going? And you said, I believe it's a moral thing to do. A lot of our teachers listening are having a really rough couple years now with everything that's kind of bubbled up due to the pandemic, and it's becoming a challenge to keep people in our field,
stay engaged,
stay motivated. I'm wondering if there's some crossover here. What would you say is keeping you motivated towards these things. And, because there is some despair in some of the, when you investigate something and you learn about it, and it can be overwhelming. What keeps you going forward? I know you said action oriented, but anything else that's keeping you going?
Yeah, I mean, I have felt this too. It's been a very hard 2 years. And I too have been exhausted and felt like this is an impossible hill to climb. I don't know. I guess because so much of the issues we're facing right now are directly science related, I feel like I have to keep chugging, that what I'm doing is a brick in the wall of this greater good of connecting people and science and helping to promote science inclusivity and a science literacy. I feel like I'm just directly able to help with this, and so I got to keep rolling. I can't just sit back and let this all happen.
Do you get little rewards though? I mean, are there? We have our moments as teachers where the student comes back and says, we talked about this at home, or we made these changes. Are there, as a science communicator, rewards that, even those little rewards can go a long way that you have that are doing that?
Absolutely. I'll get messages, I'll get DMs, and they're like, I showed my daughter this and she's really excited. She wants to be a scientist. And that's amazing. I get positive feedback from my students too. Where they'll say, I really didn't want to take this class, but this is pretty fun.
I think a part of science communication, science teaching is doing a better job of identifying those and everybody stop. I have to catalog this moment, because that's what we need, is to give ourselves permission and a mechanism to kind of hang on to all of those moments and events.
Carly,
absolutely.
The other thing I was thinking of as Dale asked that is there a dark side to putting yourself out there on social media and being a science communicator? And how do you deal with that?
There sure is. The internet, it's a crazy place.
Is there an anti-frog faction out there? Is that what you're saying?
There's
squid haters.
I've yet to meet the squid haters. I've yet to meet the frog haters. I have met the women haters. I've definitely met the haters of the women with high education and the haters of the women in the science.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
It's, it's just part of what this is. In fact, I had to have a talk with my dad when I was home for Thanksgiving. I had a tweet go viral just before that, and it was viral enough that the meanies were coming out. And my dad was just so mad that these people were being mean to me. And, it's just kind of part of it. And it's not that it doesn't affect me. It does. But you got to know when to just mute it and let it go. Just let it go. And know that for all of the yucky that you see, what most people are seeing is the good stuff.
Yeah.
The reason things go viral is because people relate to it for the most part. So the last one that I had was actually about me being not particularly good at math. And that was a very truthful tweet. I've struggled with math all my life. I was the kid who had to have a tutor through middle school and high school. And you're told that you can't get into the sciences if you're not good at math.
Yeah.
And I am not good at math. And it feels important that people know that that's not really true. You can be not good at math and find your path in the sciences. You learn your tools, right? You learn how to work Excel. You collaborate with people. You don't have to be able to just rattle off calculations or even do basic algebra or calculus off it. You figure out what you need to know and you learn it. So, I've had a lot of people tell me they wanted to be a scientist, but they couldn't because they weren't good at math. And that breaks my heart.
Yes, totally.
That's a shame.
And we have course guides and stuff like that I think break hearts that way too. And
you must be this high to ride this ride kind of a feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. And I got my PhD, with all that sensory stuff, the other thing I did was study the jet propulsion of squid, which was like some hardcore math. And I was very uncomfortable doing it. But now I couldn't be more proud of myself for getting that done. I actually just published that paper last fall, which was 5 years after I graduated with my PhD, but I wouldn't let it drop because I needed the validation of having this thing published after I cried so many tears over it. So I just had that published last fall, and I'm incredibly proud of it.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
But it's really important that people know that you can still be a scientist. And of course the meanies came out and we're all like, no, you can't. And I can't believe you're a scientist. What an idiot. And you're like, okay, maybe I am.
Well, I'd see that an opportunity. We should, now we need to showcase scientists that do that all the time. Like, I know that scientists turn to a math person to help them on crunching numbers that maybe they don't have a specialty in.
In fact, I actually think we sometimes don't do that enough.
Yeah.
I think that there's back to teachers. We're being taught in this day and age right now to be data-driven decision makers, and I always bristled with some of that because there's a limit to like knowing if what the data is showing is really telling me what it's telling me, or do I need to run some statistics on it? And I get frustrated with that. Like, I'm not the person to do this, but I need help with it. And sometimes I think we're asking teachers too much to do those things that are really out of their wheelhouse, and that's okay.
Well, that would be the same for scientists in being communicators too. They don't have to master media design to pull it off. They can turn to people to help them with those things.
Yeah, and this all goes back to understanding that science is a collaborative process.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, there's absolutely a dark side to all of this, and when you also literally put your face out there, people are whatever. People are people, but you got to roll and hope that what you're doing is actually a good thing for more than it is a bad thing for you in these moments.
Carly, thank you so much for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we wish you the best of luck in now and in the future with communicating science. And well, I want to see some of those children's books published. That's what I want to see.
Well, I might be working on that.
Oh, you heard it here.
See,
exclusive.
The listeners who stayed to the end, they have like the little Easter egg there.
Well, it was so great chatting with you both. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.